Marissa never expected a janitor to hold the fate of an entire factory in her hands until a hidden contract in German shattered everything she thought she knew. Facing ruthless threats from a CEO who believed her invisible, she had to choose to stay silent and lose everything, or fight back and risk it all. This is the story of how one overlooked woman dared to bloom in the darkest winter and change the game forever. Hi everyone. Today we're diving into a story that just might stop you in your tracks. Because what would you do if your past, the very one people assume you've buried, suddenly became the only thing that could save hundreds of lives? Would you speak up knowing the price might be everything? This is the true-to-life tale of a woman who went from being ignored, dismissed and mocked, to becoming the one person who could unravel a corporation's silent corruption from the inside out. And it all started with a mop of memory and a contract she wasn't meant to see. This could happen to anyone, even you. So before we dive into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do here. Also tell me where you're watching from and what time it is. Right now, I love seeing the community come alive. It was always gray in that part of East Cleveland. Not just the sky, but the buildings, the windows, even the light itself felt dulled by years of wear and weather. But what used to stand out vibrant and impossible to ignore were the flowers. Marissa Holloway's father had once kept the most beautiful public garden in the neighborhood. Petunias and purple and scarlet daffodils that came early like spring was showing off, and rose vines that crept up old fences and made the block smell like June even in April. But that was before his Parkinson's, before the bills, before Marissa traded law books and courtrooms for ammonia and bleach. At 34, Marissa looked older than her years, not from vanity, but from the way life had carved its mark in her posture. Her hands, once used to flip pages of legal contracts in 3 languages, were now raw from cleaning solvents. She'd been a rising star, top of her class at Ohio State Law, fluent in German legal translation, invited to clerk in D.C. But that all evaporated the night her father collapsed in the garden he'd poured his life into. The doctors called it rapid onset. The insurance called it pre-existing. And the system, it just didn't care. So Marissa put her degree on hold, pawned her computer, sold her father's gardening tools, and took the first job she could get, janitorial work at Halcyon Systems, an electronics plant that used to promise jobs for life, but had fallen into quiet decay. The once gleaming steel entrance now held a half-broken badge scanner. Inside, the walls smelled like old paper and low expectations. It was a place that had forgotten how to dream. From day one, Brenda Holt, the white supervisor with sharp nails and sharper eyes, made it clear that Marissa was unwelcome. "I don't care what your resume says," Brenda sneered once while inspecting the baseboards with a flashlight. "This isn't a place for overachievers. We clean, we shut up, we go home." And Marissa did just that, day after day, sweeping, mopping, wiping grease off machines whose functions she once would have studied in trade law. She endured snickers from younger workers who whispered when she passed, mocking her fancy speech and always looking serious face. They didn't know who she used to be, and even if they had, they wouldn't have cared. At Halcyon, the hierarchy was carved in stone, and janitors were beneath it. She kept her head down even when Brenda reassigned her to the oldest restrooms, even when coworkers accidentally spilled coffee where she just mopped. What kept her from breaking wasn't pride. It was something her father used to say as he tended his begonias. "Even wilted flowers still hold fragrance. So do you." And so she did, quietly, until the day the elevator was broken and Brenda snapped to use the executive stairs. But don't touch anything. That was how Marissa found herself alone on the top floor, rare air, far above the bleach fumes and sneers. She paused in front of the CEO's glass-walled office, pushed her cart inside, and froze. On the desk were 2 things: a mug of untouched espresso and a thick folder stamped with a foreign crest. The papers inside were dense, printed in German, and marked Vertraulicher Vertrag, confidential agreement. Her eyes scanned the lines, and what she saw made her breath catch in her throat. It wasn't just a standard acquisition, it was a takeover, a quiet one. And the clause that stood out most, one that said if fraud or financial misconduct could be proven, the foreign investors could remove Halcyon's entire executive team and seize control. Marissa stepped back from the desk as if it had burned her. She'd seen enough to understand the gravity. She also knew deep in her bones that someone had been hiding this from the workers, hiding it for a reason that smelled like cooked books, backdoor deals, and layoffs waiting in the wings. That night, as snow fell outside the tiny apartment she shared with her father, Marissa couldn't sleep. She replayed every line of that contract, every side eye from Brenda, every offhand comment from upper managers. Something wasn't right. And for the first time in years, the part of her that once argued case law and dissected legal clauses stirred awake. But what could she do? She was just a janitor. They wouldn't listen. They might fire her, or worse. Yet the stakes were clear. If she stayed silent, hundreds of underpaid workers, many black immigrant or elderly, could lose everything. Just like her father had lost his garden. And so the next morning, with trembling hands and a stomach full of dread, Marissa copied down every clause she could remember, every German phrase, and hid the notes deep inside her sock before heading to work. This time she wasn't just going to mop the floor. She chose the greenhouse, not by accident, but because it was the one place in the entire Halcyon Systems campus that still remembered color, still remembered what it meant to grow. Tucked behind the rusting loading dock and choked by vines, the old greenhouse had once been part of an employee wellness initiative long since forgotten. Now it stood silent, overgrown, and dust-covered, the glass panels cracked and stained by years of neglect. Marissa found it unlocked. It smelled like damp earth, rusted tools, and something else memory. She cleared a spot on a broken bench beneath a spindly hibiscus tree that had miraculously clung to life. She called it the Wild Bloom Room, and there in that forgotten place, Marissa laid out her notes and began building the case. It didn't take long to realize she couldn't do this alone. The risks were too great and the truth too heavy. She needed people she could trust, not just to understand the stakes, but to stand firm when the ground began to shake. That's when she remembered Patrice Monroe. Patrice, 58, had once been the heart of Halcyon's accounting office. She joined the company when typewriters still clicked in cubicles and proudly wore her first Employee of the Year plaque like a medal. Everyone knew she had the memory of a hawk and a work ethic as sharp as her pressed blouses. But after new management swept in, Patrice was pushed aside, reassigned to data verification with no access to key ledgers. Too old-fashioned, they'd said, too set in her ways, which in corporate code often meant too honest. Marissa waited until after hours. She approached Patrice with a question wrapped in code, one only someone fluent in balance sheets and backroom politics could understand. "Miss Monroe," she asked quietly, "do you remember the last time Halcyon reported a negative cash reserve while increasing executive bonuses?" Patrice looked up sharply, her pencil still. "You a journalist?" "No, ma'am, I'm the janitor." Then she smiled faintly. "But I used to read German contracts for sport." That night in the greenhouse, beneath a flickering work light strung from a cracked beam, Marissa handed Patrice a rough translation of what she'd seen. At first, Patrice just listened. Her eyes narrowed. Her fingers tightened around her pen. And then she whispered the words that cemented their alliance. "I always knew Voss was hiding something. I just didn't think someone like you would be the one to find it. Someone like her." It wasn't an insult. It was a recognition, a salute. One black woman to another, both bruised by the same system, both still standing. The next day they brought in Andre Fields. Andre was 41, the lead engineer on procurement systems, before Voss demoted him to maintenance innovation, a fancy title that meant, "We'll let you work, but don't expect input." Andre kept his head low, his headphones in, and his mouth shut. Most assumed he was checked out. But Marissa had seen him once kneeling beside a disassembled scanner system in the back hall, murmuring to himself about missing receipts and phantom equipment write-offs. That had stuck in her mind. She approached Andre with Patrice by her side. "We think Halcyon's ledger's a cover-up. We think Voss is preparing a sale. And we think it could cost hundreds of people their jobs." Andre didn't answer at first. He just stared at her. Then quietly said, "Why are you risking this?" "They'll bury you." Marissa replied, "Because they already think we're buried. We're just the ones who learned how to bloom underground." That evening, the three of them met again in the greenhouse, the scent of old soil thick in the air. They mapped out the entire scheme ghost vendors created to drain money machines listed as replaced but still in use, subcontractors paid without contracts, and a parallel payroll system that rewarded executive allies. And sitting at the heart of it all Was the confidential German contract a deal that would allow Voss to shift all blame to Halcyon's board and walk away clean? Andre pulled out a flash drive with a knowing smirk. Been watching that guy play games with inventory for 3 years. Figured it might come in handy one day. They set up shifts protocols and backup plans. Marissa would monitor executive movements and collect language details. Patrice would dig through old financials and verify irregularities. Andre would trace hardware manipulation and vendor logs. They didn't talk much about consequences. They all knew them. At best, they'd lose their jobs. At worst, they'd be accused of corporate espionage, blacklisted from the industry, branded as thieves or traitors. But none of them flinched. Because Halcyon wasn't just a paycheck. It was a microcosm of the world they'd lived in for decades, a place where hard work meant little if your skin was the wrong shade or your voice too sharp. They weren't just exposing corruption. They were challenging a hierarchy that had written them off as disposable. But Voss wasn't blind. He noticed the whispers, the hushed glances, the subtle pattern shifts. Suddenly, Andre's hours were cut. Patrice was called in for repeated performance reviews. And Marissa found Brenda Holt standing by her mop cart one morning, rifling through her belongings. Just a routine inspection, Brenda said sweetly. Can't have cleaning staff getting curious. Later that week, Marissa came back from break to find her locker wide open, her notes scattered, and a single yellow daffodil taped to the inside with a handwritten message. Stay in your lane. Flowers don't belong in boardrooms. She stared at that flower for a long time. Then she took it, pressed it between two pieces of cardboard, and slid it into the notebook she now carried with her everywhere. Because whoever sent it had forgotten something vital. Flowers always bloom, right before the break of spring. The chill inside Halcyon's walls no longer came from the broken thermostat. It came from the way silence had shifted, how it now held weight tension, and the unmistakable sense that something unseen was stirring. Gerald Voss felt it too. He didn't know exactly what was happening, but he knew enough to be suspicious. The sudden increase in printer logs, the late-night activity in departments that used to be ghost towns after 5, and the way Brenda Holt now reported to him twice as often, usually with vague complaints and warnings about a certain janitor with too much time on her hands. Voss wasn't a man who panicked, but he was a man who prepared for war at the first whiff of rebellion. So he ordered a surprise internal audit, which in reality was just a chance to rearrange power. Certain employees were reassigned without notice. Email access was restricted. Surveillance cameras were reviewed daily. And Brenda, on his orders, began tailing Marissa like a shadow, showing up outside restrooms. She cleaned, asking strange questions, and sometimes just standing at the end of the hallway, arms folded, watching. Marissa felt the noose tighten. She hadn't told her father anything, only that work was busy. He hadn't asked. He was losing his speech little by little, but his eyes still tracked her every movement, still lit up when she brought him chamomile tea, still held enough clarity that when she tucked him in one night, he reached for her hand and whispered through the stiffness in his throat, "Bloom wide, even in frost." She wrote it down. Meanwhile, the Wild Bloom room became more than a sanctuary. It became a war room. The trio gathered nightly now, comparing notes, finalizing timelines, and preparing for what Patrice called the real reckoning, the upcoming surprise audit from the German investors rumored to arrive within the next 2 weeks. That audit was their moment, their one shot, but it was also a window that would close fast. Voss knew it too, which is why 3 days before the audit team arrived, Brenda cornered Marissa near the back stairwell and hissed, "He knows. You're in over your head. You think this place is going to change for you. We built this company. You people just mop the corners." Marissa didn't answer. She just looked Brenda in the eyes, calm and still. And that silence, strong, unmoved, frightened Brenda more than 1,000 retorts ever could. Then came the boardroom meeting. The German audit team arrived quietly. No fanfare, no warning, just a line of dark sedans that slipped into the Halcyon lot on a cold Thursday morning, tires crunching ice and faces unreadable behind mirrored glasses. At the center was Helmut Stein, a seasoned auditor from Berlin, known for dismantling entire boards with a single pen stroke. Tall, immaculately dressed with a surgical stillness in his voice, Voss greeted them with polished charm and a sparkling presentation. New production charts, improved hiring numbers, Coffee catered from an upscale bakery. Every corridor gleamed. Every employee he trusted had been prepped to smile and nod. He walked the Germans through the showroom floor, the tech wing, and a strategically staged community outreach corner that hadn't existed a week ago. Meanwhile, Marissa, Patrice, and Andre moved in near silence, each in their assigned places. Patrice shadowed the finance team, watching the auditors raise eyebrows at inconsistent numbers. Andre escorted them through the loading dock, where new equipment looked suspiciously vintage beneath its fresh paint. And Marissa remained low, hovering between her usual cleaning routine and discreetly relaying notes through a burner email chain set up by Andre on a hidden server. But the final moment had to come in the boardroom. It had to be loud. It had to be real. When Voss finally sat with the Germans, he expected an hour of questions and then polite handshakes. What he did not expect was the interruption of a janitor. The door creaked open, and in walked Marissa Holloway. No uniform, no mop, just her in a deep blue blouse, slacks, neatly pressed hair, tied back, and a thick folder in her hands. Behind her walked Patrice. Behind Patrice, Andre. The board murmured. Some frowned. Some sneered. Voss stood halfway. "This is a closed session," but Marissa didn't stop walking. "I understand that, sir," she said, steady, "but I believe the auditors will want to see this." She placed the folder directly in front of Helmut Stein. Inside were side-by-side comparisons of Halcyon's official financial reports and the real numbers, discrepancies, manipulated invoices, ghost vendor accounts, and an annotated translation of the German acquisition contract. Helmut flipped through the documents. His expression didn't change, but his pace slowed. His eyes lingered on certain pages. "Who translated this?" he asked finally. "I did," Marissa replied. "I studied German legal interpretation before joining this company." "She's a janitor," Voss cut in voice laced with fury. She shouldn't be here." "She shouldn't," Helmut said. "And yet here she is." The room fell into a hush so sharp even the air seemed to retreat. Marissa took a breath, then another. And she began. She laid out the clauses, explained the fraud triggers, detailed how those very clauses would allow the German partners to seize full control if financial misconduct could be proven. She cited time-stamped emails, discrepancies in payment schedules, even showed a printout of equipment listed as lost but photographed in use just 2 days ago. Voss's hands curled into fists. "This is fabrication. None of this is credible. It's hearsay from a janitor who's scared you," Patrice said calmly. "She scares you because she's right," Andre added. Helmut didn't say a word for several seconds. Then he turned to his team and nodded once. "I'll need your server access, Mr. Voss. Immediately. And I'll require full cooperation from these 3 individuals. As of this moment, this audit is now a forensic investigation." Voss's face drained of color. No more speeches. No more performances. Just silence. And the sound of a system beginning to unravel. Outside the glass wall of the boardroom, workers had stopped pretending to mop or sort parts. They watched. They waited. And when Marissa stepped out of that room, eyes forward steps, even they saw her. Really saw her. The flower no one had watered was blooming right in front of them. By the next morning, Gerald Voss was gone. No announcement, no press release. Just an email marked effective immediately, and a line of security escorts clearing out his office under a stiff winter sky. His nameplate was pulled from the wall, his photos taken down, his legacy dismantled by 3 employees he hadn't even noticed 3 months prior. But as everyone at Halcyon Systems quickly realized, removing the head of a corrupt machine didn't mean the machine itself stopped turning. The board, caught off guard by the audit's fallout, scrambled to find a face-saving solution. After 3 emergency meetings, 1 reluctant vote, and several board members abstaining, they offered Marissa Holloway the interim CEO position. At first, she thought it was a joke, a test. But the papers were real, the signatures legitimate. Patrice and Andre both urged her to take it not for herself, but for everyone who had gone unseen and unheard for years. She accepted, and that was when the real war began. The title on her door may have changed, but the looks didn't. A few department heads stopped calling her the janitor, but their tones were just as cold. Mid-level managers whispered about her lack of executive experience. Whispers turned to smirks, then to delays, then to outright sabotage. A shipment of machine parts from Wisconsin, critical to fulfilling a new manufacturing contract, vanished from the system. Payroll errors left several workers unpaid for a week. Meetings were double booked. Security clearances revoked without warning. Maintenance logs were doctored to reflect failures that never existed. It didn't take long to identify the source loyalists, to Voss still embedded in procurement and logistics working behind the scenes, to drown Marissa in chaos and make her leadership look incompetent. The message was clear. We may have lost the battle, but we'll poison your victory. Marissa's first instinct was to isolate, to solve everything herself. But Patrice stopped her. "You're not the mop anymore, baby," she said, placing a hand on Marissa's shoulder. "You're the one holding the faucet, so stop trying to clean up their mess in silence. Let the light in." And so she did. Marissa called a town hall on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, right on the factory floor. No suits, no PowerPoint, just her. She stood where the machines hummed and the vents rattled. Workers gathered slowly, some out of curiosity, others out of cautious hope. And when she spoke, it wasn't in corporate buzzwords or empty slogans. It was with truth. "I used to clean these floors. And while I did, I saw what most people tried to ignore. I saw talent passed over voices, silence, dignity scraped away. I saw broken fans get fixed by men who weren't allowed to be engineers. I saw women train supervisors only to be told they weren't leadership material. I saw all of you. And I remember how it felt not to be seen." Then she raised a clipboard filled with her own handwritten notes. "I'm not here to play politics. I'm here to restore honor. If you're tired of silence, join me. If you believe in a halcyon that belongs to all of us, not just the boardroom, then let's rebuild it together." That speech traveled faster than any company memo ever had. And from that moment on, things began to shift. Andre took control of procurement and traced every sabotage attempt back to its source. Within weeks, 3 department heads were dismissed. Patrice overhauled the payroll system, implementing transparency measures and granting employees access to see where bonuses and benefits really went. And Marissa, she reclaimed the old greenhouse. The Wild Bloom Room became more than a hideout. It became the symbol of the new halcyon. She initiated a program where every department was assigned a flower to care for literally. Maintenance workers grew sunflowers. Packaging handled wild lilies. Accounting managed snapdragons. And every Friday before clocking out, employees were invited to waterweed or simply sit and breathe among the blooms. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. It was a return to dignity, a quiet rebellion, a way to plant roots in a place where roots had never been welcome before. Still, not everyone celebrated. Some of Voss's former allies began whisper campaigns in business circles, calling Marissa unstable, unqualified, a diversity stunt. Anonymous emails warned her to step down. One message arrived with a picture of her father's garden, now fenced off, overgrown and stamped with red X's. "Go back to your flowers," it read. But Marissa didn't flinch. Instead, she called a press conference. Not for defense, but to lay out a new vision. She opened by recounting the audit's results: fraud exposed, corruption dismantled. She detailed the new policies, profit-sharing systems, and environmental reforms now underway. She didn't ask for praise. She asked for partners. And then she did something no CEO had ever done before. In Halcyon's history, she invited 5 floor workers, Black, Latino, female, disabled, and immigrant, to stand beside her and speak as equals. The city took notice. So did national media. And within weeks, Halcyon Systems wasn't just a company recovering from scandal, it was becoming a model of reform. One headline read, "From mop to mandate, how one woman is reshaping American industry." But Marissa didn't care about the headlines. What mattered most was the growing line of workers outside the Wild Bloom Room each week, sharing stories, planting flowers, and remembering what it felt like to matter. The frost hadn't left yet, but spring was coming, and this time it would bloom from the ground up. The days that followed were a whirlwind of both hope and challenge. The pivotal shipment from Wisconsin, the one so crucial to maintaining Halcyon's new contracts, was held up in customs. Fingers pointed, rumors spread, and old board members whispered that Marissa's leadership was already crumbling. The company seemed to teeter on the edge of disaster again. But Marissa was ready. She picked up the phone and called Henry Stein, the German auditor, who had overseen the forensic investigation from the beginning. She laid out the entire situation, clearly asking for his intervention and the weight of the German conglomerate's influence to push the shipment through. Stein listened patiently. Then he promised to expedite the matter using every channel at his disposal. Within days, the shipment cleared customs and was on its way. Back at Halcyon, workers cheered. The factory roared back to life, machines humming with a renewed energy, faces brightening with each passing day. The transformation wasn't just operational, it was cultural. Halcyon blossomed into a place where transparency wasn't just a policy, but a practice. Meetings became open forums. Employees had access to financial reports. Opportunities for advancement no longer depended on favoritism or old networks, but on merit and dedication. The community gardens flourished too. Each flower assigned to departments bloomed vividly, a testament to resilience and unity. On spring mornings, workers could be seen nurturing their blooms, sharing stories, and rebuilding trust in ways that went beyond the factory floor. At the annual company celebration, children of employees gathered around the freshly planted marigold beds along the factory's perimeter. Marissa knelt by a flower bed near the entrance and gently placed a framed photo of her father, the florist, whose garden had inspired her journey among the petals. She looked up, meeting the smiles of those around her. She wasn't just the interim CEO anymore. She was a symbol, a living proof that strength, courage, and integrity could turn even the most overlooked person into a leader. That day, the sun caught the petals just right, making the marigolds seem to glow. The flower no one watered had bloomed anyway. Her story, born from struggle and nurtured by hope, spread beyond the factory walls. It inspired other companies, communities, and individuals to believe in the power of standing up no matter the odds. Marissa's message was simple but profound. True justice begins when ordinary people refuse to stay silent, when they choose to bloom even in the harshest winters. As she walked through the factory surrounded by her colleagues, engineers, accountants, janitors, and managers alike, she felt the pulse of change strong beneath her feet. A legacy not of titles or power, but of dignity, solidarity, and unwavering hope. And that, my friends, is the kind of justice that reshapes lives, families, and entire communities. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more stories that remind us all that justice lives in everyday courage. Remember, sometimes the quietest voice holds the greatest power. Stay safe, stay strong, and keep standing up for what's right. Stories like Marissa Holloway's remind us that justice isn't only about grand gestures or court battles. It's about everyday choices, the courage to speak up when it's easier to stay silent, the determination to keep going when others try to push you down, and the belief that every person, no matter their background or job title, deserves respect and dignity. If you find yourself feeling overlooked or powerless, remember Marissa's journey. Even in the darkest places, there is a seed of hope waiting to grow. Sometimes all it takes is one person to nurture it and watch a whole garden bloom. As you go through your day, think about the flowers in your own life, those small acts of kindness, moments of integrity, and sparks of resilience. They might seem invisible to others, but they hold incredible power to change the world around you. Thank you for being part of this community. Your support, comments, and stories make this space a place where justice and hope can grow. Until next time, remember, you have the power to make a difference, one step at a time.